Sometimes the hardest prisons to escape are the ones built by the people who claim to love you most. This is a story about invisible chains, silent judgments, and the courage it takes to reclaim your own narrative when your family turns your past into their weapon. What you're about to hear is a journey of awakening, resilience, and the ultimate comeback. Before we begin this incredible story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you're listening to this story from. Your support means the world to us. I never imagined that the worst betrayal of my life would come wrapped in concern, delivered with soft voices and gentle touches. But that's exactly how it happened. My name is Margaret, and I'm 35 years old. I live in a quiet suburb of Portland, Oregon, where the rain falls like clockwork, and everyone knows everyone else's business. Or at least, they think they do. For the past 3 years, I've been living in what I thought was a peaceful routine, working as a freelance graphic designer from my small but cozy apartment, attending family dinners every Sunday, and trying to rebuild the trust I'd lost years ago. You see, I made mistakes, big ones. When I was 28, I went through what I can only describe as a complete unraveling. I'd just ended a toxic relationship with a man who drained every ounce of confidence from me. In my desperation to feel something, anything, I made poor choices. I drank too much. I spent money I didn't have. I pushed away the people who cared about me. For 2 years, I was a shadow of myself, stumbling through life without direction or purpose. But I fought my way back. I got help. I went to therapy. I rebuilt my career from scratch. I learned to stand on my own 2 feet again. And my family, they said they were proud of me. They said they forgave me. They said the past was the past. I believed them. It was a Sunday afternoon in early October when everything started to crack. The autumn air was crisp, and golden leaves covered the sidewalks like a patchwork quilt. I'd brought a homemade apple pie to my parents' Cowan house, a colonial-style home with blue shutters that had been in our family for 30 years. The smell of roasted chicken drifted from the kitchen as I walked through the front door. My mother, Linda, was setting the table with her good china. She's 62, with silver hair she keeps in a neat bob and reading glasses perpetually perched on her nose. My father, Robert, was in his usual armchair, reading the newspaper. He's 65, recently retired from his job as an accountant, with deep-set wrinkles that make him look stern even when he's relaxed. My younger sister, Emily, was already there with her fiancé, Daniel. Emily is 31, blonde and polished in a way I've never managed to be. She works in marketing for a tech company and has the kind of life that looks perfect on social media. Daniel is 33, clean-cut, ambitious, and always impeccably dressed. Everything seemed normal at first. We sat down to eat, passing dishes around the table, making small talk about the weather and the upcoming holidays. But then I noticed the glances, the way my mother looked at Emily, then at Daniel, then back at Emily with this expression I couldn't quite read. The way my father cleared his throat several times but said nothing. It was Emily who finally broke the silence. She set down her fork carefully, looked at Daniel, and took a deep breath. I'm going to be completely honest with everyone. Daniel and I have been talking about something important, and we wanted to share it with the family. I smiled, expecting an announcement about wedding plans, or maybe a promotion at work. But Emily's face was too serious, too controlled. Daniel wants to start his own business, she continued. It's a consulting firm, and it's a solid opportunity, but it requires a significant investment, and it means we'd need to use our savings and take out a loan. That sounds exciting, I said genuinely. You'd be great at supporting something like that. But Emily didn't look at me. She kept her eyes on my mother. Mom, Dad, I know this is a big decision, and I know you've always taught us to be careful with money, to think about the future, to not make impulsive choices. The words hung in the air, and that's when I felt it, the shift, the weight of something unspoken pressing down on the room. My mother reached across the table and placed her hand over Emily's. Sweetheart, your father and I just want you to be smart about this. We've seen what happens when people make financial decisions without thinking them through. My stomach tightened. Robert folded his newspaper and looked directly at Daniel. Son, we like you. We think you're good for Emily. But business ventures can be unpredictable. They can consume your savings, strain your relationships, and leave you in a worse position than when you started. I felt my face grow warm. Were they talking about what I thought they were talking about? Emily nodded slowly, as if she'd been expecting this exact response. I know. I've thought about that a lot. I've thought about what happened with Margaret. There it was. My name. My past. Laid out on the table like evidence in a trial. I tried to keep my voice steady. Emily, that was 7 years ago, and it was completely different. I wasn't making a business decision. I was going through a personal crisis. My mother's hand moved from Emily's to rest on the table between us. Of course. Dear, we're not saying you're the same as Margaret. We're just saying that we've learned from experience how quickly things can fall apart when emotions override logic. But I'm not emotional about this, Emily said, her voice taking on an edge I recognized. This is a calculated risk. Daniel has a business plan, projections, potential clients already lined up. My father shook his head slowly. Margaret had plans too. She was going to turn everything around. She promised us she had it under control. And look what happened. I felt like I'd been slapped. Dad. I did turn it around. I am in control. I've been stable for 5 years. He gave me a sad smile. The kind you give a child who doesn't understand the conversation the adults are having. Of course you have, sweetheart. And we're very proud of you for that. But the lesson remains. Sometimes what looks like a good idea in the moment can lead to years of struggle. Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I appreciate your concern. But I've done my research. This isn't a gamble. My mother sighed. Margaret probably thought her choices weren't gambles either. I stood up so abruptly my chair scraped against the hardwood floor. I need some air. I walked out to the back porch, my hands shaking. The autumn wind felt sharp against my face, but I welcomed it. I needed something to ground me, to remind me this was really happening. Through the window, I could see them still, talking. My mother's hand on Emily's shoulder, my father gesturing with his hands, making some point. Daniel listening intently, nodding. Emily looking relieved. They were using me, not directly confronting me, not bringing up my past to my face in a cruel way, but using it as a cautionary tale, a warning label, a reminder of what not to do. And the worst part was how subtle it was, how reasonable they all sounded, how much they dressed it up as concern and wisdom. I went back inside after 10 minutes, forcing a smile. Sorry about that. Just needed a moment. Emily gave me a sympathetic look that felt more patronizing than kind. It's okay, Maggie. We understand this might bring up difficult memories for you. Difficult memories. As if I were the fragile one. As if my past made me too delicate to handle present conversations. The rest of dinner passed in a blur. I barely tasted the food. I laughed at the right moments, nodded when expected, and counted the minutes until I could leave without seeming dramatic. When I finally got home that evening, I sat in my car in the parking lot of my apartment building for 20 minutes, staring at nothing. The streetlights cast long shadows, and a couple walked by holding hands, their laughter floating through the cool night air. I felt hollow. Not angry, yet just hollow, like something had been scooped out of me and I hadn't even noticed until now. Over the next few days, I tried to shake off the feeling. I told myself I was being oversensitive, that my family hadn't meant anything by it, that I was reading too much into a simple conversation about financial responsibility. But then it happened again. I was at a coffee shop in downtown Portland, meeting with a potential client for a design project. The shop was one of those trendy places with exposed brick walls and baristas who took their craft very seriously. I was reviewing my portfolio on my laptop when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Margaret, is that you? I turned to see my cousin, Rachel. She's 38, works as a nurse, and has always been the responsible one in the extended family. We'd been close as children but had drifted apart over the years. Rachel, what a surprise. Sit down, please. She slid into the chair across from me, her purse settling on the floor beside her. I was just grabbing coffee before my shift. How have you been? Good. Really good, actually. I'm meeting with a new client in a few minutes. She smiled, but there was something in her eyes. A flicker of something I couldn't identify. That's wonderful. I'm so glad to see you doing well. Your mother told me you've been staying stable. Staying stable. The phrase landed like a stone in my chest. Yes, very stable. Business is good. Life is good. Rachel nodded. stirring sugar into her coffee with deliberate slowness. "That's such a relief. We all worried about you for so long." "I know, but that was years ago." She looked up at me, and her expression shifted to something more serious. "Margaret, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Did you ever feel like you'd lost yourself? Like you didn't know who you were anymore?" The question caught me off guard. Yes, absolutely. For a long time, I felt like I was just going through the motions of being a person. Rachel's eyes filled with something that might have been empathy, or might have been something else entirely. "I'm asking because my daughter, Sophie, she's 17 now. She's been making some choices lately that worry me. Staying out late, neglecting her schoolwork, spending time with people I'm not sure are good influences. I'm sorry to hear that. Being 17 is tough. I know, but I keep thinking about you, about what your family went through, and I don't want that for Sophie. I don't want her to spiral the way you did." There it was again. My past, repurposed, repackaged as a lesson for someone else. "Rachel, what I went through was specific to my circumstances. Sophie is her own person, but Rachel wasn't really listening. She was already deep in her own narrative. Your mother was telling me how hard it was, watching you make mistake after mistake, feeling helpless to stop it. She said she wished she'd been firmer with you early on, set stronger boundaries." "My mother said that." Rachel nodded. "At the family gathering last month. You weren't there. She was talking to several of us about the importance of tough love. She used your situation as an example of what happens when you let someone make their own choices without enough guidance." I felt my face grow hot. "And what did everyone else say?" Rachel shrugged. We all agreed. It was a good reminder. Your story has helped a lot of us think more carefully about how we parent, how we support family members who might be struggling. My story, as if it were a fable, a teaching tool, something that existed for their benefit. "I'm glad my pain could be so educational," I said, unable to keep the edge out of my voice. Rachel's face fell. "Oh, Margaret, I didn't mean it like that. I'm sorry. I just meant that we all learned from what you went through. It wasn't for nothing. Wasn't for nothing. As if my suffering needed to have a purpose to justify its existence." My client arrived then, saving me from having to respond. Rachel left with an awkward hug and a promise to stay in touch that we both knew was empty, but the damage was done. The conversation replayed in my mind, all through my client meeting. I smiled and nodded and showed my designs, but internally, I was reeling. That evening, I called my best friend, Nicole. She's been my anchor since high school, and the one person who never judged me during my darkest times. We met at a wine bar near her apartment in the Pearl District, a trendy neighborhood with art galleries and upscale restaurants. Nicole is 36, with dark curly hair and an infectious laugh. She works as a social worker, so she understands human complexity in ways most people don't. I told her everything. The dinner at my parents' house, the conversation with Rachel, the growing sense that I was being used as a negative example without my consent. Nicole listened without interrupting, her face growing more troubled with each detail. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and let out a long breath. "That's messed up, Maggie. That's really messed up. Am I overreacting? Maybe they don't realize how it sounds." She shook her head firmly. "No, you're not overreacting. What they're doing is subtle, but it's real. They're using your past to control present situations that have nothing to do with you, and they're doing it without giving you any agency in how your story is told. But they're not being mean about it. They're not trying to hurt me." Nicole leaned forward, her eyes intense. "That almost makes it worse, because you can't call them out without looking oversensitive or like you're not over your past. They've created this perfect trap where your pain becomes their property, and you have no right to object." Her words crystallized something I'd been feeling but couldn't articulate. "That's exactly it. I feel like I've lost ownership of my own story. Because you have," Nicole said gently. "And the question is, what are you going to do about it?" I sat with that question as the evening wore on. Nicole and I talked about other things, lighter things, but her words echoed in my mind long after we said goodbye. What was I going to do about it? When I got home that night, I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat by the window, watching the city lights twinkle in the distance. Rain had started to fall, creating patterns on the glass that blurred and reformed endlessly. I thought about the last 7 years, the work I'd put in to rebuild myself, the therapy sessions where I'd excavated every painful truth, the nights I'd cried myself to sleep, wondering if I'd ever feel whole again, the slow, grinding process of learning to trust myself. And I thought about how, without my knowledge or permission, all of that had been reframed as a cautionary tale for other people's convenience. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "It was wonderful having you for dinner, sweetheart. Emily and Daniel really appreciated everyone's input. Love you." I stared at the message for a long time. Wonderful. Appreciated. Love you. All true. Probably. All sincere. And all completely missing the point of what had actually happened. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my laptop and started writing. I didn't know what yet, just that I needed to document what I was feeling, to reclaim my narrative in some small way. The rain grew heavier outside, drumming against the window in a steady rhythm. Somewhere in the building, a dog barked, a car horn honked in the distance, and I sat there, typing, trying to find the words for something I was only beginning to understand. That love and manipulation aren't opposites. That concern can be a weapon. That sometimes the people who hurt you most are the ones who never raise their voices or their hands. They just take your story and make it theirs. And you're supposed to smile and be grateful for the lesson you've provided. The thing about realizing you've been used is that once you see it, you can't unsee it. It's like someone flipped a switch in your brain, and suddenly patterns emerge from what you thought was random noise. Every memory gets re-examined. Every conversation takes on new meaning. I spent the next morning going through old text messages and emails, looking for clues I'd missed. And there, they were, scattered throughout years of family communication like breadcrumbs, leading back to a truth I'd been too trusting to notice. It started small, so small I'd dismissed it at the time. 3 years ago, my brother Thomas was considering leaving his stable job as a middle school teacher to pursue a master's degree in education administration. He's 33 now, married to a woman named Sarah, with 2 kids. Back then, he'd been excited about the opportunity, energized by the possibility of growth. I found the email thread where he'd asked the family for advice. I remembered the conversation vaguely, but reading it now with fresh eyes, I saw something I'd missed before. My mother's response had been measured and careful. She'd written about the importance of stability, about not making rash decisions that could impact his family's security. And then, tucked into the 3rd paragraph, there it was. We all know how difficult it can be when someone pursues something without fully considering the consequences. Margaret's experience taught us that passion alone isn't enough. You need a solid plan and realistic expectations. At the time, I'd read it as a gentle reference, a way of saying that my brother should be more careful than I'd been. I hadn't realized it was the beginning of a pattern. Thomas had ended up not pursuing the degree. He'd stayed in his teaching position, and as far as I knew, he was content. But now I wondered how much of that decision had been influenced by the ghost of my mistakes hovering over his choices. I kept digging. 2 years ago, my cousin Jennifer had wanted to take a year off from her nursing career to travel through Europe. She was 29 at the time, single, with no dependents. It seemed like the perfect time for such an adventure. I found a group text message from that period. My Aunt Patricia, Jennifer's mother, had shared her concerns with several family members, including my parents. I'm worried Jennifer isn't thinking this through. Taking a year off could hurt her career trajectory. What if she can't find a good position when she comes back? What if she runs out of money halfway through and needs us to bail her out? My father had responded with what I now recognized as his signature move. He'd shared a thoughtful message about financial responsibility, about the importance of thinking long-term, about how temporary pleasures can lead to lasting consequences. And then he'd added, "We learned this lesson with Margaret. Sometimes what feels like freedom is actually recklessness in disguise." Jennifer hadn't taken that trip. She'd stayed, picked up extra shifts, and eventually bought a condo. Whenever I saw her at family gatherings, she seemed happy enough. But I remembered now that there'd been a spark in her eyes when she talked about travel, a light that had dimmed over time. How many decisions had been influenced by my past? How many dreams had been quietly suffocated under the weight of my cautionary tale? I closed my laptop and stared at the wall of my apartment. The morning light filtered through the curtains, creating soft patterns on the hardwood floor. Outside, I could hear the sounds of the neighborhood waking up. Cars starting, doors closing, the distant bark of a dog. My phone rang. It was Thomas. "Hey, Maggie. Got a minute?" His voice sounded strained, and immediately I was on alert. "Sure. What's going on?" He sighed heavily. "Sarah and I had a fight last night. About money. About priorities. She wants to renovate the kitchen, and I think we should put that money toward the kids' college funds. It got heated. I'm sorry. That sounds stressful." There was a long pause, and then he said something that made my stomach drop. "Mom called this morning. Sarah had already talked to her about it, and Mom told her that immediate gratification often leads to regret, that she should think about whether a new kitchen is worth potentially struggling later." "Okay," I said carefully. "And then Mom said she'd seen what happens when people make emotional decisions about money, that she'd watched you struggle for years because you prioritized how you felt in the moment over long-term stability." The words hit me like cold water. "Thomas, and that's not what happened. I wasn't renovating a kitchen. I was falling apart after a relationship ended. It's not remotely the same situation. I know that," he said quietly. "But the way Mom tells it, the lesson is the same. Don't let emotions override logic. And she uses you as the proof." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of it settling over me. "How long has this been happening?" Thomas hesitated. "Honestly, for years. Every time someone in the family considers doing something that involves any kind of risk, financial or otherwise, your name comes up. Not in a mean way, more like a reminder, like a warning sign." I felt something crack open inside me. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't think you knew, and I didn't want to hurt you by bringing it up. You've worked so hard to move forward. I didn't want to drag you back into that time in your life." His kindness made it worse somehow. He'd been protecting me from the truth of how I was being used, and in doing so, he'd allowed it to continue unchecked. "Thomas, I need to understand something. When you decided not to pursue your master's degree, was that because of me? Because of what Mom and Dad said?" Another long pause. "Partly. I mean, I had my own doubts. But yeah, when they brought up your experience, it made me second-guess everything. I started seeing risks I hadn't seen before. I started feeling irresponsible for even considering it. I'm so sorry. Don't apologize," he said firmly. "This isn't your fault. You didn't ask to be turned into a cautionary tale, but I didn't stop it either. How could you stop something you didn't know was happening?" It was a fair point, but it didn't ease the guilt gnawing at me. We talked for a few more minutes, and then Thomas had to go. His words stayed with me long after we hung up. I spent the rest of the day in a fog, moving through my design work, mechanically, my mind elsewhere. When evening came, I found myself driving to my parents' house, without having consciously decided to go there. The neighborhood looked the same as always. Neat lawns, cars and driveways, the occasional jogger passing by. The trees were nearly bare now, their branches reaching toward the gray sky like skeletal fingers. I parked in front of the house and sat there for a moment, gathering my courage. I wasn't sure what I was going to say, only that I needed to say something. My mother answered the door with a surprised smile. "Margaret, what a lovely surprise. Come in, come in." The house smelled like vanilla and cinnamon, probably from one of her scented candles. My father was in the living room, watching the evening news. He looked up and waved. "To what do we owe this pleasure?" my mother asked, leading me to the kitchen. I was just about to make some tea. "I need to talk to you both about something." Something in my tone must have registered because her smile faltered slightly. "Of course, dear. Let me get your father." We gathered around the kitchen table, the same table where we'd shared thousands of meals over the years. The same table where, just days ago, my past had been used to influence my sister's future. I decided to be direct. I've become aware that my mistakes from years ago are being used as examples in family conversations. Conversations I'm not part of. Decisions that have nothing to do with me. My mother blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean that when Emily and Daniel were discussing his business venture, you and Dad used my past as a reason for them to be cautious. When Thomas was considering his master's degree, My struggles were mentioned as a warning. When Jennifer wanted to travel, my name came up as evidence of what happens when you follow your heart instead of your head. The silence that followed was thick and uncomfortable. My father shifted in his chair. My mother's hand went to her throat, a gesture she made when she was processing something unexpected. "Sweetheart," my father finally said, "we weren't trying to hurt you. We were just sharing the wisdom we gained from that difficult time. You went through something hard, and we learned from it. That's not a bad thing. But you're using my pain as a teaching tool without my permission. You're reducing years of my life to a cautionary tale that you pull out whenever it's convenient." My mother's eyes filled with tears. "Margaret, we love you. Everything we say comes from a place of love. We don't want other people in the family to suffer the way you suffered. I understand that. But do you see how it feels from my perspective? Every time you bring up my past in those contexts, you're reminding everyone that I'm the one who failed. I'm the example of what not to do. I'm the warning label. That's not how we think of you," my mother said, reaching for my hand. I pulled it back gently. Maybe not consciously, but that's what's happening. And it's affecting more than just me. Thomas didn't pursue his dreams partly because he was afraid of ending up like me. Jennifer didn't take her trip for the same reason. How many other people have made smaller versions of themselves because my story was used to scare them into compliance? My father frowned. "That's not fair. We were helping them think critically about their choices. Were you? Or were you controlling their choices by making them afraid of becoming me?" The words hung in the air. My mother was crying openly now, dabbing at her eyes with a napkin. My father looked stern, his jaw tight. "I think you're being overly sensitive about this," he said. "We've always supported you. We helped you through that terrible time. We never abandoned you. I know, and I'm grateful for that. But support doesn't give you the right to use my story however you want. My past belongs to me, not to you." My mother stood up abruptly. "I need a moment." She left the kitchen, and I could hear her footsteps climbing the stairs. My father and I sat in awkward silence. The refrigerator hummed. The clock on the wall ticked steadily. "Your mother is very upset," he said finally. "I can see that. She doesn't understand why you're attacking us like this. I'm not attacking you. I'm trying to set a boundary." He shook his head slowly. "When we raised you kids, we taught you that family means being there for each other. That means sharing our experiences, good and bad, so others can benefit from them. But I'm not a textbook, Dad. I'm a person, and I get to decide how my story is told and used." He looked at me with something that might have been disappointment or might have been confusion. "I think you've been spending too much time in your own head, Margaret. Sometimes outside perspective is valuable. Outside perspective is different from being turned into a cautionary tale without my knowledge." He stood up. "I think it's best if you go home now. Your mother needs time to process this. And frankly, so do I." I left without arguing, feeling both relieved and devastated. As I drove home through the darkening streets, I replayed the conversation in my mind, wondering if I'd said too much or not enough. When I got back to my apartment, I found a text from Emily. "Mom called me crying. What did you say to her?" I stared at the message for a long time before responding. I told her the truth, that my past is being used to control other people's presence. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, "I don't understand what you're talking about. Mom and Dad have always been supportive of you." I typed out a long explanation, deleted it, started again. Eventually I just wrote, "Can we talk in person?" She agreed to meet me the next morning at a cafe near her office. When I arrived, she was already there, looking polished and professional in a navy blazer. Her expression was guarded. We ordered coffee and sat by the window. Rain drizzled down the glass, blurring the street outside. "Emily, do you remember when you and Daniel were discussing his business idea at dinner last week?" "Of course. Do you remember how Mom and Dad responded?" She nodded. "They were cautious. They wanted us to think it through carefully. And do you remember them mentioning me?" Emily shifted uncomfortably. "They mentioned that they'd learned to be careful about financial decisions. They used your situation as context." "As context," I repeated. "Emily, that's exactly what I'm talking about. My breakdown 7 years ago is being used as a reason for you to question your decisions today, decisions that have nothing to do with what I went through. But it's relevant," she said defensively. You did go through something difficult, and they're trying to prevent us from making similar mistakes. But I didn't make a business decision. I was in emotional crisis. The situations aren't comparable." Emily's face hardened. "Maybe you're too sensitive about this. Maybe you're not as over your past as you think you are." The words stung, particularly coming from my sister. "Or maybe you're uncomfortable admitting that our parents have been subtly controlling your choices by using my failures as leverage. That's not fair, isn't it? You said yourself that you and Daniel really appreciated everyone's input, but that input was based on a distorted version of my experience. They made my pain sound like recklessness. They made my struggle sound like poor judgment. And they did it so smoothly you didn't even question it." Emily was quiet for a moment, stirring her coffee absently. "Even if that's true, I don't think they meant any harm. They love you. They love all of us. I know they do. But love doesn't excuse manipulation, and intention doesn't erase impact." She looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw uncertainty in her eyes. "What do you want me to do about it?" "I want you to notice it, to see it for what it is, and to make your own decisions without my past being used as a weapon against possibility." Emily stood up. "I need to get to work. I'll think about what you said." She left, and I sat there alone, watching the rain, and wondering if I'd just destroyed my relationship with my sister, along with the one I'd damaged with my parents. Over the next few days, I heard nothing from my family. No calls, no texts, no emails. The silence was deafening. Nicole checked in regularly, offering support and perspective. "You're doing the right thing," she kept saying. "Setting boundaries is hard, but it's necessary." I wanted to believe her, but doubt crept in during the quiet moments. Maybe I was being too sensitive. Maybe I was making something out of nothing. Maybe my pain had made me paranoid. And then, 4 days after my confrontation with my parents, I got a call from my Aunt Patricia, Jennifer's mother. "Margaret, dear, I heard there was some family drama. I wanted to check on you." Her voice was warm, concerned, and immediately I was wary. "I'm okay, just working through some things. Your mother told me you felt like the family was using your past inappropriately. She's very hurt, you know. I understand, but my feelings are valid too." "Of course they are," Patricia said smoothly. "But I think you might be misunderstanding the situation. When we talk about what you went through, it's because we care. It's because we don't want others to suffer the way you did." And there it was again. The same justification, the same refusal to see what I was actually saying. "Aunt Patricia, when you talked Jennifer out of her trip to Europe, did you mention my name?" She hesitated. "I might have, as an example of why taking time off from career can be risky. And did you ask my permission to use my story that way?" Another pause. "Why would I need permission? It's just family conversation. Because it's my story, my pain, my experience. And when you use it without my consent to influence someone else's choices, you're taking something that belongs to me and making it yours. I think you're overthinking this. Margaret, family members share, experiences. That's normal. Sharing experiences is normal. Turning someone into a warning label without their knowledge is not." She sighed, and I could hear the frustration in it. "I think you need to consider that maybe you're still struggling more than you realize. Maybe this reaction is coming from unresolved issues." And there it was, the ultimate dismissal. If I objected to how I was being used, it must be because I was still broken, still struggling, still the cautionary tale they'd created. "I have to go," I said. "Thank you for calling." I hung up before she could respond, my hands shaking with anger and frustration. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I pulled out my old journals from that terrible period in my life. I'd kept them tucked away in a box at the back of my closet, not wanting to revisit that pain. But now I needed to remember. I needed to reconnect with who I'd actually been, not who my family had decided I was. I spent hours reading through pages of messy handwriting, tear-stained entries, desperate prayers to a universe I wasn't sure was listening. I read about the relationship that had destroyed me, the man who'd systematically dismantled my sense of self-worth. I read about the nights I'd drunk myself to sleep, not because I was reckless, but because I was trying to numb unbearable pain. I read about the shame I'd felt, the isolation, the certainty that I'd never be whole again. And I read about the slow climb back, the first therapy session where I'd cried for an hour straight, the moment I'd realized I wanted to live, really live, not just survive, the tiny victories that had felt enormous at the time. This was my story, not the sanitized version my family told, not the cautionary tale they'd constructed. This was the raw, complicated human truth of what I'd endured and overcome, and they'd taken it from me. By the time I closed the last journal, it was past midnight. My face was wet with tears, but something inside me had solidified, a core of certainty that hadn't been there before. I deserved to control my own narrative. I deserved to have my experience honored, not exploited. And if my family couldn't understand that, then I needed to create distance until they could. The next morning, I wrote an email, not to my parents, not to Emily or Thomas or any individual family member. I sent it to the whole family group thread, everyone who'd been part of these conversations over the years. I kept it simple and clear. To my family, I love you all, and I know you love me. But I need to address something that's been happening for years, without my knowledge. My struggles from 7 years ago have been used repeatedly as cautionary examples in family discussions. While I understand the intention was never malicious, the impact has been significant. My past has been turned into a tool for influencing others' decisions, and I've had no say in how my story is told or used. Moving forward, I'm asking that my experiences not be discussed or referenced in conversations I'm not part of. My story belongs to me, and I get to decide if, when, and how it's shared. I'm setting this boundary not out of anger, but out of self-respect. I hope you can all understand. With love, Margaret. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. The responses came quickly. Some were supportive. Thomas wrote a thoughtful message acknowledging what I'd said. My cousin Michael, who I barely knew, sent a simple note saying he understood and respected my boundary, but others were defensive. My father wrote a terse message about being ungrateful for family wisdom. My mother didn't respond at all. Emily sent a private message saying I was creating unnecessary drama. And Patricia wrote a long email about how disappointed she was in me, how I was tearing the family apart over something trivial. I read each response once, then closed my email. I'd said what I needed to say. How they chose to receive it was up to them. That night, alone in my apartment with a mug of tea and the sound of rain against the window, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not peace exactly, but ownership, agency, the beginning of reclaiming what had been taken. My story was mine again, and whatever came next, I would face it as myself, not as the cautionary tale they'd created. The silence that followed. My email was louder than any argument could have been. Days turned into a week, and the usual flow of family communication dried up completely. No casual texts asking how I was doing. No invitations to Sunday dinner. No forwarded articles or funny memes. Just silence. At first, I told myself this was what I wanted. Space, distance, time for everyone to process what I'd said. But the absence of contact felt like a weight pressing down on my chest, especially during the quiet evenings when I'd normally be texting with Thomas or scrolling through family photos Emily posted online. Work became my refuge. I threw myself into projects with an intensity that surprised even me. I redesigned a logo for a local bakery, created marketing materials for a nonprofit, and started developing a new portfolio website. My clients noticed the increased energy and quality in my work, and referrals started coming in steadily. Nicole checked on me every day, sometimes with a quick text, sometimes with a phone call. "You're doing great," she'd say. "Give them time. They'll come around or they won't. But either way, you've stood up for yourself." I wanted to believe her, but doubt gnawed at me during the long nights, whispering that maybe I'd overreacted. Maybe I'd destroyed my family over something I should have just ignored. It was 2 weeks after I'd sent the email that everything shifted again. I was at a grocery store in my neighborhood, a small organic market that sold overpriced produce and artisanal bread. I was in the pasta aisle, trying to decide between 2 types of gluten-free noodles, when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Margaret?" I turned to see Daniel, Emily's fiancé. He was alone, pushing a cart with a few items in it. He looked uncomfortable, like someone who'd run into an acquaintance at an awkward moment. "Hi, Daniel. How are you?" He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "I'm good. Listen, do you have a minute? Could we grab a coffee or something? I was surprised, but curious. Sure. There's a cafe across the street. We left our carts at customer service and walked to the small coffee shop, a cozy place with mismatched furniture and local art on the walls. We ordered drinks and sat in a corner booth, away from the other customers. Daniel wrapped his hands around his mug, staring at the steam rising from it. I wanted to talk to you without Emily knowing. She'd be upset if she knew I was here. Okay, I said carefully. He looked up at me, and I saw something in his eyes I hadn't expected. Guilt. Your email really made me think. About the dinner at your parents' house. About how they talked about you. About how Emily and I responded to it. I waited, giving him space to continue. At the time, it seemed reasonable. Your parents were just being cautious, giving us wise advice from their own experience. But after reading what you wrote, I started replaying that conversation in my head, and I realized something. What? They didn't just mention your past. They used it as a weapon. Not overtly, not meanly, but effectively. Every time I started to feel excited about the business idea, I'd remember what they said about you, about how passion can lead to disaster, about how feeling confident doesn't mean you're right. I felt a flicker of validation hearing this from him. So what did you do? I did my research anyway. Went deeper into the business plan, consulted with experts, ran every possible scenario. And you know what I found? What? The risk is manageable. Not zero, but manageable. I have contingency plans, backup funds, an exit strategy if things don't work out. But if I'd listened to your parents, if I'd let your story scare me away from even exploring it thoroughly, I'd have given up on something that could actually work. So you're going to do it? He nodded. Yeah, Emily's still hesitant, but I think she'll come around. The point is, your email woke me up. It made me realize that their advice wasn't really about me or my situation. It was about controlling the narrative, keeping everyone safely inside the lines they'd drawn. I felt tears prick at my eyes. Thank you for telling me this. I should have spoken up at that dinner. When I saw how they were using you, I should have said something. I'm sorry I didn't. We talked for another hour. Daniel shared more about his business plans, his hopes, his fears. I found myself genuinely excited for him, encouraging him in ways my parents never had. When we finally parted ways, he gave me a quick hug. Don't give up on Emily, he said. She's struggling with all of this, but deep down, she knows you're right. I walked home feeling lighter than I had in weeks. One person understood. One person had looked past the family narrative and seen the truth. It wasn't much, but it was something. That evening, my phone rang. It was Thomas. Hey, Maggie, can you talk? Of course. He sighed heavily. I had a conversation with Mom and Dad today. It didn't go well. What happened? I told them I thought you were right, that they'd been using your past inappropriately, that it had affected my decisions too. There was a long pause. And Dad got angry. Really angry. He said I was being manipulated by you, that you'd always been good at playing the victim, that I was betraying the family by taking your side. My stomach sank. Thomas, I never wanted to put you in the middle of this. I know, but I needed to say it, because it's true, and because I've been thinking about that master's degree, the one you didn't pursue. Yeah, I'm going to apply for next year. I've already started looking at programs. Sarah's supportive, and I realize that if I keep letting fear control my choices, I'm going to wake up at 60 wondering what I could have been. His words filled me with a mix of pride and sadness. I'm so happy for you. Really. Mom cried when I told her. She said I was making a mistake, that I'd regret it, that I was throwing away stability for a dream that might not pan out. And what did you say? I told her that maybe some dreams are worth the risk, and that I'd rather try and fail than spend my life wondering. We talked until late into the night. Thomas shared his plans, his excitement, his nervousness. For the first time in years, I heard genuine joy in his voice, the kind of joy that comes from choosing yourself despite the fear. After we hung up, I sat in the darkness of my apartment, processing everything. My email had created ripples I hadn't anticipated. Not just conflict, but also awakening. People were starting to question the narratives they'd accepted without examination. The next morning, I received an unexpected email. It was from Jennifer. My cousin, who'd wanted to travel through Europe. Margaret, I need to talk to you. Can we meet? We arranged to meet that afternoon at a park near the waterfront. The November air was cold and crisp, and the river reflected the gray sky like a mirror. Jennifer was already there when I arrived, sitting on a bench overlooking the water. She stood when she saw me, and I was struck by how tired she looked. Dark circles under her eyes, tension in her shoulders. "Thank you for coming," she said. We sat down, and for a moment, we just watched the river flow by. A jogger passed. A couple walked their dog, life continuing in its ordinary way. "Your email destroyed me," Jennifer said finally. "Not in a bad way, in a necessary way." "What do you mean?" She turned to face me. "When I read what you wrote, about your story being used without your permission, about becoming a cautionary tale, something clicked. I realized that's exactly what happened to me, with the Europe trip." She nodded. "I wanted that trip so badly. I'd dreamed about it since college. I had the money saved, the time requested off work, the itinerary planned, and then my mom started talking to me about responsibility, about not being impulsive, about learning from other people's mistakes, and she mentioned me multiple times. She'd say things like, "Remember what happened to Margaret when she acted on emotion instead of logic. Remember how hard it was for her to recover. Do you want to end up like that?" I felt anger rising in my chest. Taking a trip isn't the same as having a breakdown. I know that now. But at the time, she made them seem connected. She made it seem like any choice based on desire rather than duty was a step toward disaster. And I believed her. "So you didn't go." "I didn't go." She turned back to the river, her eyes distant, and I've regretted it every single day since. I bought the condo she wanted me to buy. I picked up the extra shifts she thought were responsible. I did everything right according to her definition. And I've been miserable. I reached over and took her hand. "It's not too late." She laughed, but it was a bitter sound. "I'm 31 now. I have a mortgage, a career I've invested years in. The window has closed. Windows don't close, Jennifer. They just move. Maybe you can't take a year off now, but you could take a month. Maybe you can't quit your job, but you could request a sabbatical. There are always options if you're willing to look for them." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said something that broke my heart. "I don't even know what I want anymore. I've spent so long doing what everyone else thought I should do that I've lost touch with my own desires." We sat together in silence, two women who'd been shaped by the same family patterns, trying to find our way back to ourselves. As November deepened toward December, more fractures appeared in the family structure. My cousin Michael reached out to tell me he'd been struggling with coming out as gay, partly because he'd heard family members use my past as an example of what happens when you follow your heart instead of your head. "I never realized they'd do the same thing with my sexuality," he wrote. "But after your email, I started paying attention. Every time I'd hint at who I really was, someone would bring up the importance of not making decisions you can't take back, of not being impulsive, of learning from others, mistakes. Rachel, my other cousin, called to apologize. I used your story with my daughter Sophie, and I shouldn't have. You were right. I was trying to control her choices by making her afraid of becoming you. I'm sorry." Each conversation, each revelation, showed me how deep the pattern ran. My story had become a tool, a lever my family used to keep. Everyone in line. And now that the tool had been exposed, people were starting to question everything. But not everyone was awakening. Some were doubling down. 3 weeks after my email, my mother finally broke her silence. She showed up at my apartment unannounced on a Saturday morning. I opened the door to find her standing there, looking smaller and older than I remembered. "We need to talk," she said. I let her in, offering tea. She declined. We sat in my small living room, an awkward distance between us on the couch. "Your father and I have been discussing your email," she began. "We've given it a lot of thought." I waited. "We understand that you feel hurt. We understand that you think we've been inappropriate. But Margaret, I need you to understand something." "What?" Her eyes filled with tears. "Watching you go through that terrible time nearly destroyed me. There were nights I couldn't sleep. Terrified I'd get a call that something had happened to you. Days I could barely function because I was so worried. Your pain became my pain. I know, Mom. I never wanted to hurt you. So when other family members started making choices that seemed risky, choices that could lead to the kind of suffering you experienced, of course I spoke up. Of course I used what we learned from your situation. How could I not? How could I watch someone else potentially go through that without trying to prevent it? But Mom, don't you see? Those situations weren't the same as mine. Thomas wanting to pursue education isn't the same as me having a breakdown. Jennifer wanting to travel isn't the same as me falling apart after a bad relationship. She shook her head stubbornly. Risk is risk. Pain is pain. And I will not apologize for trying to protect my family, even if it means controlling them. I'm not controlling anyone. I'm offering wisdom gained from experience. It's my experience, Mom, not yours. You witnessed it, but you didn't live it, and you don't get to decide how it's used or what it means. Her face hardened. I think you're being selfish. Your father and I supported you through the worst time of your life. We didn't abandon you. We didn't judge you. And this is how you thank us, by accusing us of exploitation. I'm not accusing you of exploitation. I'm asking you to respect my boundaries. She stood up abruptly. I can't do this. I came here hoping you'd see reason, but I can see now that you're still too caught up in your own feelings to consider anyone else's. Mom, please. But she was already heading for the door. When you're ready to apologize to your father and me, when you're ready to acknowledge that we've only ever tried to help you, then we can talk. Until then, I think it's best if we have some space. The door closed behind her with a soft click that felt like a thunderclap. I sat there for a long time, staring at nothing. Part of me wanted to run after her, to apologize, to smooth everything over. But a stronger part knew that doing so would mean surrendering the ground I'd fought so hard to claim. Nicole came. Over that evening, bringing wine and takeout, we sat on my couch, eating pad thai and drinking Chardonnay while I recounted the conversation with my mother. She's not ready to hear you, Nicole said gently. Maybe she never will be, but that doesn't make you wrong. It feels wrong. It feels like I'm destroying my family. You're not destroying anything. You're revealing what was already broken. There's a difference. The next few weeks were the hardest. Thanksgiving came and went without an invitation to my parents' house. I spent it with Nicole's family instead, grateful for their warmth but acutely aware of the absence of my own. Emily called me once during that time. Her voice was cold, controlled. Mom is devastated. Dad is furious. Thomas is causing problems by supporting you. You've turned this family upside down over nothing. It's not nothing, Emily. It is. To me. She hung up before I could respond. But there were also moments of unexpected connection. Daniel texted me regularly with updates about his business plans. Thomas called every few days to share his progress on graduate school applications. Jennifer sent me photos of travel brochures she'd been collecting, small steps toward reclaiming her dreams. And slowly, painfully, I began to build a new understanding of what family could mean. Not the automatic connection of shared blood, but the chosen connection of mutual respect and genuine support. December arrived with early darkness and cold rain. The city decorated for the holidays. Strings of lights appearing on houses and storefronts. Everywhere I looked, I saw images of perfect families gathered around dinner tables, laughing and loving and whole. I felt the absence of my own family like a physical ache, but I also felt something else. Something that had been missing for 7 years. I felt like myself. Not the cautionary tale. Not the warning label. Not the example of what not to do. Just Margaret. Flawed, complicated, trying her best. Enough. It was 3 days before Christmas when everything came to a head. I received a text from Thomas. Family meeting at Mom and Dad's tomorrow at 2. Emily insisted everyone be there. I think you should come. I stared at the message, my heart pounding. Part of me wanted to decline, to protect myself from whatever confrontation was waiting. But another part knew I needed to face this. I'll be there, I replied. That night, I barely slept. I rehearsed conversations in my head, prepared defenses, imagined outcomes ranging from reconciliation to total rupture. When I arrived at my parents' house the next afternoon, several cars were already in the driveway. Thomas's SUV, Emily's sedan, even Jennifer's car, which surprised me. I sat in my car for a moment, gathering courage. The winter sun was weak and pale, casting long shadows across the lawn. The house looked the same as always, but nothing felt the same. Finally, I got out and walked to the door. Before I could knock, Thomas opened it. "I'm glad you came," he said quietly. Inside, the living room was full. My parents sat together on the couch, my father's arm around my mother's shoulders. Emily and Daniel were in the armchairs. Jennifer sat on a dining room chair that had been brought in, and Thomas stood near the window. Everyone looked at me when I entered. The silence was heavy, expectant. Emily stood up. She looked different somehow, less polished, more uncertain. "I called this meeting because things have gotten out of hand. We're a family, and we need to work this out." I remained standing near the door, ready to leave if necessary. Emily continued, her voice shaking slightly. "Margaret, when you sent that email, I was angry. I thought you were being dramatic, oversensitive, selfish." She paused, and I saw her glance at Daniel. He gave her an encouraging nod, but Daniel made me read it again, really read it, and then he asked me a question that I couldn't answer. "What question?" He asked me if I'd ever made a decision without wondering if I'd end up like you, without hearing Mom and Dad's warnings about your mistakes echoing in my head. My mother shifted uncomfortably on the couch, and I realized the answer was no, Emily said, her voice breaking. "For 7 years, every choice I've made has been filtered through the lens of your cautionary tale. Every risk I've avoided, every safe path I've chosen, every dream I've scaled back, all of it shaped by fear of becoming you." Tears were streaming down her face now, and that's not fair to you, but it's also not fair to me, because I've never really chosen my own life. I've just chosen not to be you. The words hung in the air, raw and honest. My father stood up. "This is ridiculous. Emily, you're a successful, stable woman. How is that a problem? Because I don't know if I chose success, or if I was just too afraid to risk anything else." Emily shot back. "Dad, can't you see what you and Mom have done? We protected you," my mother said, her voice rising. "We kept you from making the same mistakes Margaret made." "But they weren't mistakes," Thomas interjected. He moved away from the window, positioning himself next to me. "Margaret didn't make bad business decisions or fail to plan adequately. She had a breakdown after a relationship ended badly. She struggled with depression and anxiety. Those aren't choices. Those are circumstances that happened to her." My father's jaw tightened. "The point remains that she acted irresponsibly during that time." "The point," I said, finally finding my voice, "is that you've spent 7 years using my worst moments as a reason to control everyone else's best opportunities." The room went silent. I stepped further into the room, feeling strength building in my chest. "You took my pain and repurposed it. You took my struggle and weaponized it. And you did it without ever asking me how I felt about it, without ever considering that I might have a right to control my own narrative." My mother was crying now, but I couldn't stop. Every time someone in this family wanted to take a risk, grow, explore, dream, you pulled out my story, like a stop sign. And you did it so smoothly, so lovingly, that no one questioned it. Not even me, until recently. "Margaret," my father said, his voice tight with controlled anger, "everything we did came from love. I know, but love without respect is just another form of control." The words seemed to echo in the sudden silence. Jennifer stood up. She'd been quiet until now, but something had shifted in her expression. "Uncle Robert, Aunt Linda, I need to say something too." My parents looked at her with surprise. "I didn't take my trip to Europe because of Margaret's story, because my mom used what happened to Margaret to convince me that following my dreams was dangerous, and I've been living half a life ever since." My mother started to speak, but Jennifer held up her hand. "I'm not done. Margaret's email didn't create problems in this family. It revealed problems that were already here, problems we all participated in by staying silent." She looked at me, and I saw determination in her eyes. "Margaret, I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner. I'm sorry I let them use you that way, and I'm grateful you finally said something." More voices joined in. Michael spoke about his struggles with coming out. Rachel apologized for using my story to control her daughter. Even Daniel added his perspective, talking about how close he'd come to abandoning his dreams because of secondhand fear. Through it all, my parents sat on the couch, looking smaller and more vulnerable with each revelation. My mother cried silently. My father's face grew increasingly tight. His jaw clenched. Finally, when everyone had spoken, my father stood up. His voice was cold and controlled. I see how this is going. Everyone's decided that your mother and I are the villains in this story, that we're manipulative and controlling. Fine. If that's what you all think, then perhaps it's best if we take a step back from family involvement altogether. Dad, Thomas started, but my father cut him off. No, we've heard enough. Your mother and I opened our home, our hearts, our wisdom to all of you, and this is how we're repaid, with accusations and blame. He looked directly at me. Margaret, I hope you're satisfied. You've turned everyone against us. Before I could respond, Emily stood up. Her voice was firm, stronger than I'd heard it before. Dad, stop. Just stop. My father looked at her with surprise. This isn't about villains and victims. This isn't about us against you. It's about acknowledging that something unhealthy has been happening and choosing to change it. She moved to stand beside me, and I felt her hand slip into mine. Margaret didn't turn anyone against you. She just refused to keep being your cautionary tale. And that made the rest of us realize we'd been living in cautionary tales of our own. My mother finally spoke, her voice thick with tears. So what are you saying? That we're terrible parents? That everything we've done for you means nothing? You're not terrible parents, Thomas said gently. You're human parents who made a mistake. A big one. And now we're all asking you to acknowledge it and do better. The room fell silent again. The moment stretched out, fragile and precarious. Everything hung in the balance. Years of relationships, decades of family history, all teetering on the edge of what came next. My father looked at each of us in turn. His face was a complicated mixture of anger, hurt, and something that might have been fear. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. I need time to think about all of this. He walked out of the room. We heard his footsteps on the stairs, then the sound of a door closing upstairs. My mother stood up slowly. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't fully read. There was hurt there, yes, but also something else. Something that might have been the beginning of understanding. I never wanted to hurt you, Margaret, she said softly. You have to believe that. I do believe that, Mom, but impact matters more than intention. She nodded slowly, then followed my father upstairs, leaving the rest of us standing in the living room, uncertain, but somehow lighter. Emily squeezed my hand. Thank you for not giving up. Thomas came over and put his arm around my shoulders. We've got a long road ahead, but at least we're finally on the right path. As I drove home that evening, the city lights blurred with my tears. Not tears of sadness, exactly, but of release, of something shifting, breaking open, beginning to heal. I didn't know what would happen next with my family. Whether my parents would eventually understand or continue to resist, whether relationships could be rebuilt, or if some bridges had been burned beyond repair. But for the first time in 7 years, I felt like I owned my story again, and that, I was learning, was worth whatever came next. The week between Christmas and New Year felt suspended in time, like the whole world was holding its breath. I heard nothing from my parents. The silence was different this time, though, not punishing or manipulative, but genuinely uncertain, like everyone was waiting to see what shape we'd all take when the dust finally settled. Emily called me on the 27th. Her voice was tentative but warm. Can we have lunch? Just you and me? We met at a small Italian restaurant downtown, one of those family-owned places with red checkered tablecloths and photos of Sicily on the walls. Emily was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 glasses of water waiting. She stood when she saw me, and we hugged. It was awkward at first, then genuine. Thank you for coming, she said as we sat down. Of course. We ordered food and made small talk while we waited. The weather, holiday plans, work projects, safe territory, while we found our footing with each other again. When the food arrived, Emily set down her fork and looked at me directly. I've been doing a lot of thinking since that meeting. About everything you said. About how I've been living my life. I waited, letting her find her words. I realized something that scared me. She continued. I'm 31 years old, and I can't name a single major decision I've made purely because I wanted to. Everything has been calculated, measured against some invisible standard of what's safe and acceptable. That must be a hard realization. She nodded. Daniel and I had a long conversation about the business, about why I was really hesitant, and it wasn't because the plan was flawed or the risk was too high. It was because I was terrified of becoming you. The words stung a little, even though I understood what she meant. Not the real you, she clarified quickly, but the version of you that Mom and Dad created, the cautionary tale, the warning of what happens when you choose passion over security. I reached across the table and took her hand. Emily, I'm so sorry that my struggle became a weight you had to carry. Don't apologize. You didn't do this. They did. And I let them, because it was easier than examining my own fears. She pulled her hand back and picked up her fork, moving pasta around her plate absently. I told Daniel we should move forward with the business plan, that I support him completely. That's wonderful. He cried when I told him. She smiled, but her eyes were sad. He'd started to think I didn't believe in him, that I thought he wasn't capable, but it wasn't about him at all. It was about me being too scared to let either of us take a chance. We talked for another hour, really talked in a way we hadn't in years. Emily shared things she'd never told me, how she'd turned down a job opportunity in New York because it felt too risky, how she'd ended a relationship with someone she loved because he was an artist and Mom had worried about financial stability, how she'd spent years making herself smaller, safer, more acceptable. I've been so angry at you, she said finally, for the email, for the confrontation, for making everything complicated. But really, I was angry at myself for taking so long to see the truth. You see it now. That's what matters. We parted with another hug, longer and tighter this time. As I watched her walk away, I felt something shift. Not complete healing, but the beginning of it. The first threads of a relationship built. On honesty, rather than unspoken fear. Thomas called that evening. I've been talking to Mom and Dad, he said without preamble. Well, trying to talk to them. Dad mostly lectures. Mom mostly cries. But I think something's shifting. What do you mean? He sighed. Dad's starting to ask questions. Not apologizing yet, but questioning. Like, he asked me yesterday if I really thought he'd been controlling. Not defensively, but genuinely. Curious, like the idea had never occurred to him. That's something, I said. Mom's harder to read. She goes back and forth between understanding and defensiveness. Yesterday she told me she's been having nightmares about you, about that time in your life. I think she's traumatized by it in a way we didn't realize. That made sense. I'd been so focused on my own experience that I hadn't fully considered how it had affected her. But trauma didn't excuse what had been done with it. I'm going to keep talking to them, Thomas continued. Keep pushing gently. Dad respects persistence, and Mom responds to patience. Maybe between all of us, we can get through to them. Or maybe we can't, I said quietly. And we have to accept that. There was a long pause. Yeah, maybe. After we hung up, I sat by my window watching the city lights. The holidays had always been hard for me. Reminder of connection and family that felt more obligatory than genuine. But this year felt different. Harder in some ways, but also more real. New Year's Eve came, and I spent it with Nicole and a small group of her friends. We gathered at someone's apartment with a view of the river, drinking champagne and making toasts as midnight approached. When the countdown began, I found myself thinking about the past year, about the email I'd sent, the boundaries I'd set, the relationships that had shifted and strained and, in some cases, strengthened. As everyone shouted Happy New Year and hugged and kissed, Nicole pulled me aside onto the small balcony. The cold air was shocking after the warmth inside, but it felt clarifying. How are you really doing? She asked. I considered the question. Honestly, I don't know. I feel like I'm in this weird in-between place. Not where I was, but not where I'm going either. That's called growth, she said with a smile. It's uncomfortable, but it's movement. We stood there in the cold, watching fireworks bloom across the sky, and I felt something I hadn't expected. Hope. Not the naive kind that believes everything will work out perfectly, but the resilient kind that believes you can survive whatever comes. The first week of January brought unexpected change. Received an email from my mother. The subject line was simply, "Can we talk?" My finger hovered over the delete button for a moment before I opened it. Margaret, I've been doing a lot of thinking and some things your father and I need to say to you. Would you be willing to meet with us? Just the three of us. No agenda, No expectations, just conversation. Love, Mom. I showed the email to Nicole during our coffee date the next day. She read it carefully, then looked up at me. What do you want to do? I don't know. Part of me wants to say yes, to hope this means real change. But another part is scared it's just another attempt to make me back down. Only one way to find out, Nicole said. But whatever you decide, make sure you're protecting yourself. Don't go into it hoping for a specific outcome. Go into it knowing you'll be okay regardless of what happens. Her words stayed with me as I crafted my response. I kept it simple. Mom, I'm willing to meet. How about Saturday afternoon at the coffee shop near the waterfront? Margaret. Saturday arrived cold and clear, one of those winter days where everything looks sharp and defined. I got to the coffee shop early, ordering a latte and choosing a table near the window with a view of the river. My parents arrived together, looking older and more uncertain than I'd ever seen them. My father's shoulders were slightly hunched, his usual confident bearing diminished. My mother's eyes were red-rimmed, like she'd been crying recently. They ordered coffee and joined me at the table. For a moment, none of us spoke. The silence wasn't hostile, just heavy with everything unsaid. Finally, my father cleared his throat. Margaret, your mother and I have spent the past 2 weeks doing something we should have done years ago. We've been examining our behavior, our motivations, and the impact we've had on you and the rest of the family. I waited, not trusting myself to speak yet. My mother reached across the table, stopping just short of touching my hand. We want you to know that we've heard you, really heard you, and we're starting to understand what we've done. Starting to, my father emphasized. I won't pretend we understand everything or that we agree with every characterization, but we've come to accept that our intentions don't erase the harm we've caused. The words felt significant, though not quite an apology. I took a sip of my coffee, giving myself time to process. Your father and I went to see a counselor, my mother said. Just the two of us. We needed help understanding how things got so twisted. A counselor. I couldn't hide my surprise. My father nodded. Dr. Sanders. She specializes in family dynamics. We've had 3 sessions so far. My mother's eyes filled with tears. She helped us see that we've been using your past as a way to manage our own anxiety. Every time someone in the family took a risk, we'd panic. And instead of dealing with our panic, we'd use your story to make them as scared as we were. It felt like control, my father added, but Dr. Sanders says it was really about fear. Fear of losing another child to pain, fear of helplessness, fear of watching someone we love suffer. But you made me into a weapon, I said quietly. You turned my suffering into a tool. We did, my mother said, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. And we're so sorry. The apology hung in the air. I'd imagined this moment countless times over the past weeks, but the reality felt different. Not triumphant or vindicating, just sad. I appreciate you saying that, I said carefully, but I need you to understand that an apology isn't enough. There needs to be actual change. We know, my father said. Dr. Sanders suggested we work on something called boundary respect, that we need to ask permission before sharing family members' stories, especially difficult ones, and we need to separate our anxiety from other people's decisions, my mother added. Just because we're afraid doesn't mean we have the right to make everyone else afraid too. We talked for another hour. It wasn't a perfect conversation. There were moments of defensiveness, particularly from my father, times when my mother's tears felt manipulative, even if they were genuine. But there was also something real happening, something like the beginning of accountability. Before we parted, my father said something that surprised me. I need you to know that I'm proud of you, for standing up to us, for setting boundaries. Your mother and I raised you to be strong and independent, and then we punished you when you actually were those things. My mother nodded. You've taught us more in the past month than we taught you in 35 years. That's hard to admit, but it's true. As I watched them walk away, hand in hand toward their car, I felt something, complex and layered. Not forgiveness exactly, not yet, but maybe the possibility of it, somewhere down the road. That evening, I called Thomas to tell him about the meeting. He was quiet as I recounted the conversation, then let out a long breath. Do you believe them? I believe they want to change. Whether they can actually do it is another question. Fair enough. How's the graduate school application going? I asked, changing the subject. He laughed. Terrifying and exciting. I submitted everything last week. Now I just wait. I'm proud of you, Thomas. Thanks, Maggie. That means a lot. He paused. You know what's funny? For years I thought being responsible meant staying safe. But watching you fight for yourself, watching you refuse to keep playing the role they assigned you, that's real responsibility. Taking responsibility for your own story. His words stayed with me long after we hung up. The next few weeks brought small but significant changes. My parents started showing up differently in family conversations. My mother called to ask if she could mention my college major to someone at church who was considering design school. A small thing, but she was asking permission instead of assuming ownership of my information. My father sent an email to the extended family apologizing for using personal stories as teaching tools without consent. It was formal and slightly awkward, but it was there, public, accountable. Emily and Daniel moved forward with the business plans. Jennifer booked a 2-week trip to Portugal for March. Michael came out to the family officially, and my parents, while clearly uncomfortable, were trying to be supportive. Things weren't perfect. There were still awkward moments, still slips into old patterns, but there was movement, growth, the slow, messy work of change. I started going back to Sunday dinners, but on my own terms. I'd show up when I wanted, leave when I needed to. I stopped performing the role of the grateful, reformed family member and started just being myself. And myself, it turned out, was enough. One evening in late January, I was working on a design project when my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. After a moment, I realized it was Rachel, my cousin who'd used my story with her daughter, Sophie. Margaret, I wanted to let you know that Sophie and I had a long talk. I told her the truth about why I'd been so controlling, about using your past to justify my fear. She was angry at first, but I think it helped her understand that my behavior was about me, not about her. Thank you for making me face this. I stared at the message for a long time. Thank you for telling me. I wrote back. How is Sophie? She's good. Figuring out who she is without my fear hovering over her. It's hard to watch her make choices I wouldn't make, but I'm learning that's not my job. My job is to love her, not control her. Another small shift. Another person choosing differently. As January turned to February, I found myself settling into a new normal. Relationships with my family were different now. More honest, but also more distant in some ways. The easy familiarity had been replaced by something more careful, more intentional. But I was okay with that, because carefulness meant consciousness, and consciousness meant choice. I started writing again, not just in my private journals, but publicly. I started a blog about reclaiming narratives, about the ways families use stories as tools of control, about the courage it takes to own your own past. The response surprised me. People wrote to share their own experiences. Adult children whose parents used their struggles as warnings to siblings. People whose mistakes had been turned into family legends that defined them forever. Men and women fighting to reclaim their stories from those who'd appropriated them. I wasn't alone in this. The pattern I'd experienced was everywhere, hidden in plain sight in families across the world. Nicole read my blog posts and laughed. You've accidentally become an advocate. I don't know about that, I said. I'm just trying to figure things out. That's what advocacy is, she replied. Figuring things out loudly so others don't have to figure them out alone. One Saturday morning in early February, I was at my favorite coffee shop working on a blog post when someone approached my table. I looked up to see a woman about my age, maybe a bit younger, holding a cup of tea nervously. Are you Margaret? She asked. The one who writes the blog about family narratives. I nodded, surprised. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I had to tell you. Your writing saved my relationship with my sister. We weren't speaking because of something similar to what you described. Your words gave me the language to explain what was happening. We're talking again now. Working on it. Her eyes filled with tears. Thank you. Just thank you. She left before I could respond, disappearing back into the crowded coffee shop. I sat there, stunned, my hands trembling slightly as I returned to my laptop. Something was happening. Something bigger than just my family, my story, my pain. I'd opened a door by refusing to be silent, and other people were walking through it. That evening, my mother called. Not about anything specific, just to talk. We chatted about ordinary things. Her garden plans for spring, a book she'd read, my latest design project. Before we hung up, she said something that made me pause. I'm learning that being a good mother isn't about protecting you from everything. It's about respecting you enough to let you face what comes, and trusting that I raised you strong enough to handle it. Thanks, Mom. That means a lot. After we disconnected, I stood at my window watching the city lights. February darkness falling early, the promise of spring still weeks away, but even in the cold, I could feel something shifting, the slow thaw of winter into something new. My phone buzzed again. A text from Emily. Daniel's first client signed today. We're celebrating. Want to join us for dinner? I smiled. I'd love to. As I got ready to go. Out, pulling on a coat and scarf, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at me was familiar, but also somehow new. Same face, same eyes, but something in the expression had changed. I looked like someone who owned her story. And for the first time in 7 years, maybe for the first time in my life, that was exactly who I was. Spring arrived in Portland with the sudden insistence that only spring can manage. One day the trees were bare and gray. The next they exploded with blossoms that carpeted the sidewalks in pink and white. The city seemed to exhale after months of holding its breath, and I felt myself doing the same. It had been 4 months since I'd sent that email. 4 months since I'd reclaimed my story from the people who'd been using it without permission. And in those months, everything had changed, and nothing had changed. And somehow both were true at once. My blog had grown beyond anything I'd imagined. What started as a personal outlet had become a community of thousands of people sharing their own experiences with family narratives, control disguised as concern, and the hard work of setting boundaries with people you love. I'd been invited to speak at a local community center about reclaiming personal narratives, and the room had been standing room only. My design business was thriving too. The confidence I'd found in my personal life had spilled over into my professional world. I was taking on bigger projects, charging what I was worth, saying no to clients who didn't respect my boundaries. Success, I was learning, wasn't just about talent. It was about believing you deserved it. On a Saturday morning in late March, I was working at my dining table when my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Jennifer standing there, tanned and glowing, a huge smile on her face. "I'm back," she announced, pulling me into a hug before I could even invite her in. "Portugal, tell me everything." We spent the next 2 hours on my couch while she showed me hundreds of photos on her phone and told me stories about cobblestone streets, ocean views, fresh seafood, and conversations with strangers that had turned into friendships. But more than the places, what struck me was the light in her eyes, the aliveness I'd seen glimpses of before but never fully. "I needed that trip more than I realized," she said finally. "Not just to see Portugal, but to prove to myself that I could make a choice purely because I wanted to. No justification, no permission, no apologizing for taking up space in my own life. How did your mom react?" Jennifer laughed. She was terrified the whole time I was gone, called me constantly, but I set boundaries, told her I'd check in twice a week, and that was it. And you know what? By the end, she was asking me questions about my experiences instead of warning me about dangers. That's huge. It is. And it wouldn't have happened without you speaking up first. You showed all of us that we could say no to the narratives we'd been living in. After Jennifer left, I sat with her words. I hadn't set out to inspire anyone or start a movement. I'd just been trying to survive, to reclaim something that belonged to me. But in doing so, I'd apparently given others permission to do the same. That evening, Thomas called with news. I got accepted. Full scholarship to the program I wanted. I start in September. "Thomas, that's incredible." His voice was thick with emotion. I keep thinking about how close I came to not applying. How I almost let fear make this decision for me. But you didn't. You chose yourself. We did. All of us. You started it, but we all chose to follow. After we hung up, I thought about the ripple effect of speaking truth. How one person's courage could give others permission to be brave too. How breaking one pattern could crack open possibilities for everyone trapped in similar ones. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Sunday dinner. Tomorrow. Emily has news to share. Will you come? I smiled. I'll be there. Sunday afternoon found me back at my parents' house, walking up the familiar path with a bottle of wine and butterflies in my stomach. Some things never got completely comfortable, and maybe that was okay. Comfort could sometimes be another word for complacency. Everyone was already there when I arrived. Thomas and Sarah with their kids, Emily and Daniel. Even Jennifer had been invited. The house smelled like roasted chicken and fresh bread, familiar and grounding. My mother greeted me at the door with a hug that felt genuine. "I'm glad you came," she said quietly. "Me too." My father was in the living room, and when he saw me, he stood and crossed the room to embrace me. Another small shift. Before all of this, our greetings had been perfunctory. Now they felt intentional, like we were both aware of the fragility and preciousness of connection. We gathered around the dinner table, the same table where this had all begun months ago, but the energy was different now. Less performance, more presence. Emily stood, her face glowing with excitement. "Daniel and I have an announcement." She looked at him, and he nodded encouragingly. "The business is doing really well, better than we'd hoped. We signed 3 major clients this month, and the projections for the year are strong." Everyone erupted in congratulations, my father included. I watched him carefully, looking for signs of the old patterns, the subtle undermining disguised as caution, but his smile seemed genuine, his pride unguarded. "And," Emily continued, "we've made another decision. We're going to buy a building downtown, turn the ground floor into office space for the business and live in the way. Loft above it. It's a big investment, a big risk, but we believe in it." My mother's hand went to her throat, an old gesture of anxiety. Then she caught herself, took a breath, and smiled. "That sounds wonderful, sweetheart. Tell us about it." We spent the next hour talking about Emily and Daniel's plans, their dreams, their careful calculations mixed with wild hope. My parents asked questions that were genuinely curious rather than veiled warnings. They shared concerns without using anyone's past as ammunition. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Later, as we moved to the living room for coffee and dessert, my father pulled me aside. "Can I show you something?" He led me to his study, a room I'd rarely entered as a child. It had always been his private space, lined with books and financial documents and the quiet order he preferred. He opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out a notebook. "I've been writing," he said, almost shyly. "Dr. Sanders suggested it as a way to process things." He handed me the notebook, and I saw pages filled with his precise handwriting, journal entries about fear, control, the anxiety of watching a child suffer, raw reflections on how his own upbringing had shaped his parenting, how his father's rigidity had taught him that safety was the highest value. I looked up at him, surprised by the vulnerability of what he'd shared. "I wanted you to know that I'm trying," he said. "Not just saying I'm trying, but actually doing the work. Understanding where my behavior came from so I can change it. Thank you for showing me this, Dad." He took the notebook back, holding it carefully. "I may never fully understand what I did to you, to all of you, but I'm learning to sit with that discomfort instead of defending against it. That's all any of us can do." We rejoined the others, and I felt something settle in my chest. Not closure exactly, but a kind of peace with the ongoing process of healing. As dessert was served, my mother stood up and tapped her glass gently. "I have something I'd like to say." The room quieted. "These past months have been the hardest of my life," she began, her voice shaking slightly, harder in some ways than when Margaret was struggling years ago, because this time, I had to face my own failures instead of focusing on someone else's. I glanced at Emily, who reached over and squeezed my hand. "I've spent a lot of time in therapy," my mother continued, "working through why I used Margaret's past the way I did, and I've come to understand that I was so traumatized by watching her suffer that I became obsessed with preventing anyone else from suffering. In any way." She looked directly at me, but in trying to protect everyone from pain, I ended up causing a different kind of pain. "I took your story, Margaret, and I used it as a shield against my own anxiety, and I'm deeply, truly sorry." Her eyes filled with tears. "I can't undo what I did, but I can promise to keep working on myself, to keep learning, to keep trying to be the mother you all deserve, instead of the one my fear turned me into. The room was silent for a moment. Then Thomas started clapping, and soon we all joined in, not because everything was fixed, but because my mother had done something genuinely brave. She'd taken responsibility without making excuses. After dinner, as people were getting ready to leave, Emily pulled me aside. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what?" "For not giving up. On yourself, on us, on the possibility that things could be different. I know it would have been easier to just walk away from this family. I considered that, maybe, but walking away would have meant they won, that they got to keep my story, keep using it however they wanted. This way, I got it back." Daniel joined us, putting his arm around Emily. "We're thinking about having a small party next month to celebrate the business launch. Will you come? Maybe bring that friend of yours, Nicole?" I'd love that. As I drove home that evening, the sun setting in brilliant oranges and pinks behind the city skyline, I thought about the journey of the past 4 months, how terrifying it had been to send that email, how painful the confrontations had been, how many times I'd doubted myself, wondered if I was overreacting, considered backing down, but I hadn't backed down, and in refusing to keep playing the role assigned to me, I'd freed not just myself, but everyone else trapped in their own assigned roles. My phone buzzed at a red light. A text from a blog reader. "Your post today about forgiveness versus reconciliation really helped me. I've been feeling guilty for not forgiving my parents, but you helped me understand that boundaries and healing can exist without forgiveness. Thank you." I smiled, sending back a quick heart emoji before the light changed. Over the next few weeks, life settled into a new rhythm. I was busy with work, with the blog, with rebuilding relationships on new foundations. Thomas was preparing to start his graduate program. Jennifer was planning another trip, this time to Iceland. Emily and Daniel were moving forward with their building purchase. My parents were seeing Dr. Sanders regularly, both together and individually. They were learning, slowly and imperfectly, to manage their anxiety without controlling everyone else. They were learning to ask instead of assume, to respect instead of dictate. It wasn't always smooth. There were still moments of tension, still slips into old patterns quickly caught and corrected. But the overall direction was clear. We were all choosing something different. One evening in mid-April, I was at a park near my apartment, watching the sunset and working on a blog post. And when my phone rang, it was Michael, my cousin who'd come out as gay. "Margaret, I have to tell you something." "What's up?" "I met someone. His name is David, and he's amazing. And I just introduced him to my parents, including your aunt and uncle, and everyone was kind, awkward, but kind. His voice was full of joy and disbelief. A year ago, I wouldn't have done this. I would have hidden, kept myself small, stayed in the closet, because it felt safer. But watching you refuse to stay small gave me courage." After we hung up, I sat watching the light fade from the sky, the park emptying around me as people headed home for dinner. I thought about courage, how it wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. I thought about stories, how powerful they were, how much damage they could do when used as weapons, how much healing they could facilitate, when told with truth and owned with pride. I thought about family, how complicated it was, how blood didn't guarantee understanding, how sometimes the healthiest thing you could do was step back and let everyone find their own way. And I thought about myself, about the woman I'd been 7 years ago, drowning in pain and shame. I wished I could go back and tell her that she'd survive, that the worst moments of her life wouldn't define her forever, that one day she'd reclaim her story, and in doing so, help others reclaim theirs. As I walked home through the spring evening, cherry blossoms drifting through the air like snow, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not just contentment or stability, or even happiness, though I felt those too. I felt free from the weight of other people's narratives about who I was, free from the shame of mistakes I'd already learned from, free from the obligation to make myself smaller so others could feel more comfortable. I was Margaret, not a cautionary tale, not a warning label, not an example of what not to do, just Margaret, flawed and strong, broken and healing, human and enough, and my story, it was mine again. Every painful chapter, every hard-won lesson, every scar and triumph. Mine to tell or not tell, mine to share or keep private, mine to define and redefine as I grew and changed. No one could take that from me again. I wouldn't let them. As I unlocked my apartment door, my phone buzzed one more time. A text from my mother. Thank you for giving us another chance. I know we don't deserve it, but I'm grateful for it every day. Love you, sweetheart. I read it twice, then typed back, love you too, Mom. We're all figuring this out together. And we were, imperfectly, messily, courageously, one conversation at a time, one boundary at a time, one choice at a time. I set down my phone, made myself a cup of tea, and opened my laptop. I had a blog post to finish, designs to complete, a life to live, my life, my story, my terms, and that, I had learned, was the only way worth living.